the Bowlers. I'm Amy Bowler and my husband Kent, and we have 7 children. And our oldest, we actually have 1 grandchild and another grandchild on the way. So we have been homeschooling for about 20 years. Our oldest is 23, and we started homeschooling him from the beginning, and all the way down to our 1-year-old over there. We live in St. George, Utah, but we've lived in other places in the country too. We lived in Colorado for many years. We lived in Oregon, and we're really happy to be in St. George, but we've homeschooled in all those places as well. And I'm going to turn the time over to Kent, who's going to start us out. We're going to kind of go back and forth. Oh, not yet. Is that working?
This one.
Oh, okay.
We are excited to be here and thankful for the opportunity to speak to you about what we do and what we love and what we're passionate about. So the topic that we were given is homeschooling in the constitutional way. Let me give you a different topic. I like to call this patriots or posers, defining leadership in America today. Now let me give you a picture of someone who might be termed a poser. I don't know this gentleman, and he's probably a wonderful, excellent man. But I came across this picture and just had to grin a little bit. You know, he's even got the little bead bracelet that he made with the flag on it. And sometimes this is what we see with posers. These are people who, on the outside, have all the trimmings. They look like they're engaged in the good fight, but on the inside, or in reality, there's not a whole lot going on there. And again, I don't know this individual, and I'm sure he's a great man. I just use it as an example. Let me give you an example, though, of someone who I would call a patriot. This is General Henry Knox. I like to refer to General Henry Knox lovingly as the 300-pound bookworm. He did weigh that much. He was an amazing man, large in stature, but also large in brain. He studied. He loved to read. Reading was his passion. Books were his passion. So much so that for a career, he had a bookstore. And so from his early days, he would read and read and read, and he continued that passion throughout his life. And he would order in books for his bookstore that no one would ever purchase, but he wanted to read them. And one of his biggest passions was with artillery. He loved the artillery. Well, early on in the war, the British had sieged Boston. Boston was under siege. They shut down the port, and the first assignment that the Commander-in-Chief, General Washington, had was to go take care of the situation in Boston. And going there, and with his council of war, they had no idea how they would ever break this siege. And it was wreaking havoc on the economy. It was awful. And it wasn't looking good for the Patriots, for the Americans. And Henry Knox had been assigned, or had been called as a general serving with General Washington. And Knox came to General Washington with a proposal. He had this plan. He said, out in Fort Ticonderoga, which was several hundred miles away, we have lots of cannon. And if we could go get those cannon and bring them back here and put them up on Dorchester Heights overlooking the port, it would be game over. And Washington gave him the green light, and so Knox used his genius, his understanding with artillery, got a team, went and got these cannon in the middle of winter. His plan had been to put them on sleds and bring them back across the ice. Well, there was a warm period there, a warm season, and as they were crossing lakes, the ice on the lake would break through, and those cannons would drop through to the bottom of the lake. But they never lost a single cannon. They brought all those cannon, drug them through the mud, got them to Boston, and in one night's time, they put those cannon in place around Boston. The next morning, the British woke up, were amazed at what they had done, and immediately surrendered and vacated from Boston. great example of a patriot, not because of who he looked like, but because of who he was and what he was willing to do.
I want to talk about another great patriot. This happened pre-Revolutionary War. After the Boston Massacre occurred in Boston, a man received a knock on his door one night. This man was John Adams, and he was being asked to represent the British soldiers who had just been accused of killing the American soldiers in this skirmish that became known later as the Boston Massacre. John Adams knew that if he represented these British soldiers, he would likely lose his law business because nobody in Boston liked the British occupying them. Nobody agreed with what was going on from Britain's perspective. But John Adams had an incredible education. And in that moment, he had a choice to make. Was he going to stand up and do what he knew was right? Or was he going to cave in and do what was easy, what was going to be politically correct, what was going to make him more money? And in that moment, because of his education and because of the way he'd been raised, he chose correctly. He said yes. And I imagine that night as he was talking with Abigail, he said it with a little bit of sadness in his voice. Yes, I'm going to do it. Who knows what's going to happen? But I'm going to do it because it's right, because I know what's right, and because it's what God wants me to do. Sorry. So he defended those soldiers, and he actually acquitted all of them, and they were able to. It's a fantastic trial, and John Adams didn't just defend them half-heartedly. He defended them with everything that he had. John Adams is one of my heroes, one of the true patriots. And we bring up those two stories today about those patriots because they are the kind of leaders that we needed in those times. And today, in the crisis that our nation is facing, we need those very same kind of leaders. Where do we find them? Our country needs those kind of leaders, and not just in politics. We need those leaders in our homes, in our businesses, in our communities. And that is why we've chosen to homeschool our children, because we feel like the education of our children begins in our homes, and that it's really vital for them to learn to be those kinds of leaders. We need those leaders, and as we educate them in our homes, we can raise them up to be those kind of leaders. This is a quote by John Adams. Look at that. Okay, hang on a second. I'm going to lift the laptop up. It should be our care to elevate the minds of our children and exalt their courage, to accelerate and animate their industry and activity, to excite in them an ambition to excel in every capacity, faculty, and virtue. If we suffer their minds to grovel and creep in infancy, they will grovel all their lives. That's a picture of John and Abigail Adams when they're younger. John and Abigail placed great importance on the education in their home, and we, like them, have chosen to be the primary educators of our children because we place such a high value on that. And we want our children to become the kind of leaders, the kind of patriots that our nation needs. I want to share a quote from Alexis de Tocqueville. I know our previous speaker was sharing about when he came over in 1830, 1831, he came over to America to look at this grand experiment and to see how it was working. I think the European nations were so baffled by what we were doing here. And he wrote 2 volumes about it. One volume is about the governance of our nation, and the other volume is about the societal impact, like education and culture. And in that, he talked about, let's see, here's the quote. Whoops. Now I lost the quote. Okay. I'll just read it. He said, he noticed that in New England, every citizen receives the elementary notions of human knowledge. He is taught, moreover, the doctrines and the evidences of his religion, the history of his country, and the leading features of the Constitution. In the states of Connecticut and Massachusetts, it is extremely rare to find a man imperfectly acquainted with all these things, and a person wholly ignorant of them is a sort of phenomenon. So he said 3 things. The doctrines and evidences of his religion, this is what he found being taught in New England. Also, the history of his country, and the features of the Constitution. As I was reading that quote, I was thinking back to when I was in high school. I actually went to high school in Virginia, very near Washington, D.C., and so there was high emphasis placed on taking government classes. And so I took an AP government class when I was in high school. Very much the most difficult and most rigorous government class that was offered in my high school. And I actually, when I eventually took that AP test, I got the highest score that you can get on that test. But it was only many years later when I began to teach my own children the Constitution that I remembered when I took that course, the highest course on the government that you could take in high school, not once did I read the Constitution. Not once was I actually asked to go to an actual document. Maybe a few times a small little portion, a little paragraph, but never the full document. Only textbooks and summaries of those kinds of things. So that's just one little example of how far we've strayed. So we want to share with you, here's a quote by Russell M. Nelson: "No other work transcends that of righteous, intentional parenting." We feel like we strive to educate our children like the founders were educated. And there's 3 things that we focus on: God, our family, and our community. And a lot of times we'll see those 3 words, God, family, and country. We substitute community, and we feel like community is really strong. I'll talk about that a little bit later. So the first one, God. Our primary purpose is to help our children turn to God. We want them to discover who they really are. We believe that they are sons and daughters of God. And in this process, we desire to help them find their gifts and their talents and to develop those so that they can be able to fulfill their unique missions. Russell M. Nelson said again, "Ours is the responsibility to teach his children and awaken in them an awareness of God." So the second part is family. And this is a picture of our family. We've got all our 7 kids and our daughter-in-law. So there's a few components that I wanted to just share with you about how we teach in our home. So the environment is really, really important. And there are 3 things that I'm just going to share with you today. The first is love, the second is learning, and the third is freedom. So the first one, that's love. That's a pretty self-explanatory one, and it's really easy when you have a brand new baby who's really, really adorable. And I know that God sends them that way for us because we know they're going to get a little bit harder as they go, but they're so, so cute. And I remember the first time we had our child, and you just overwhelmed by the love that you have for that child that is just a gift, that we just love them. But it's very important that in our homes we have an environment of love and that our children feel loved. And mostly that looks like time spent together, a lot of time. And that's one of the greatest advantages of homeschooling, is that we have our children with us almost all the time, and we feel so blessed by that. A lot of working together, playing together, learning together, talking. Another part of that love is understanding that they're all unique. And yes, we're all a family, but you can see by looking at the shapes and sizes, we look different. Well, actually, most of my kids, they all have red hair, and they look pretty similar in some features. But we are different, and we've been given different gifts. And I know every one of you who has a child and who has more than one child can attest to the fact that they are not the same, and they need different things. And that's part of the loving environment, that it's okay if this doesn't come easy for you. I'm going to help you find a way that you can do it, and I'm going to help teach you in a way that you can learn. It also is shown in individual time spent with each child, which can be challenging when you have a lot of children. This is, let's see, I'm going to go back to here. One of the things that we do in our family with the loving environment is every year at the beginning of the school year, we will have an individual lunch date or dinner date with each of our children. So my husband and I will go out to dinner with each of our children. And when they're younger, it's probably just McDonald's, and we just spend that time talking about how wonderful we think they are. But as they get a little bit older, even 6 and 7, then that is a time where we what we call go around the circle, and we talk about the strengths of that child. And really specifically, and I'm always the scribe, and I write down what they are. So like our 7-year-old daughter, she might say, I'm a good bike rider. And then my husband will say, you're a really great big sister. And then I might say, I love to hear your prayers. You say great, beautiful prayers. And then it'll be her turn to say something that is a strength for her. And so that's something that we do every year with each of our children. Those meetings become really, really important. I was talking to my 17-year-old daughter last night and kind of just sharing her some of the thoughts we were going to share today. She was like, those meetings are calculated? You did that on purpose? Oh, yes. But then as they get a little bit older, even our 6 and 7-year-olds will begin to, after we talk about their strengths and relish with them, and typically have a few tears as we're able to share with them some of the vision that we see of who they really are. We have a chance to talk with them about what they want to learn about this year, what they're really excited about, what they can't wait to do, maybe some kind of project they want to work on, maybe a new skill they want to learn. Our 13-year-old has been working on triathlons with his dad this past year, learning how to bike and swim and run. Our 7-year-old is learning ballet. Several of our children play piano or flute or singing. Just whatever it is they're interested in. Sometimes it'll be, oh, I can't wait to read this new book that's coming out. Or I just really want to learn about science experiments this year. I haven't done those very much in the past, and I really want to do it. So this tool is something that's really, really helped our family and each of our children, not only to feel love from us, but to feel direction in their year. I want to share this scripture with you. Seek ye diligently and teach one another words of wisdom. Yea, seek out of the best books words of wisdom. Seek learning even by study and also by faith. That ye may be prepared in all things when I shall send you again to magnify the calling whereunto I have called you and the mission wherewith I have commissioned you. That last part where the scripture's talking about the mission, That's a really strong concept that we teach our children, that they have been sent here to earth with a divine mission, and that their time in our home and their education is a time for them to figure out who they are and what that mission is. And I know that every one of God's children has a mission and a purpose for being here. And that's the guiding force of our education. All right, the next section, that kind of leads into the next section, which is the learning part. And with homeschooling, that's kind of the bulk of what we're doing, but the love is the overarching part. So with our learning, we have those yearly meetings, but then we also have weekly personal meetings with each of our children. And that is an opportunity for each of our children, depending on their age. With the younger child under 8, it's just a chance for one-on-one talking to mom. My 7-year-old daughter will just sit on our bed and just say, "Any more questions? Were there more questions that you wanted to ask me, Mom?" She's just waiting because she's just so relishes in that time. But as they get older, our 13-year-old son might share with us his goals that he had in some of his different projects or his different subjects or things he's working on. But as they, 14, 15, 16, our hope is that they will have a sense of ownership of their own education. We cannot force anybody to learn. Even if all of you were being made to sit here in these chairs and being made to listen to this conference the whole day, you could send your mind elsewhere. You could be thinking about the different flavors of ice cream that you like. I can't make you learn what I'm saying. No one can make another person learn. It has to be a choice. It's a personal choice. And that's why that next part, the freedom, is so important in the education. We have to have an environment of freedom in our home so that our children can have a chance to gain that ownership. Without freedom, then it's just force. And that's not the way that God teaches us. That's not His plan for us. It's not force. His plan for us is freedom. And that's the way that our children learn best. And really, that's the only way that we learn, when we choose to learn. So the learning part is us setting an example. Setting an example of being learners, having a lot of books in the home. When we have some free time, do our children see us learning? Talking about what we learn, a lot of talking, a lot of reading together as a family, and not just reading manuals, but reading literature, reading classic books, reading scripture, reading science experiments, reading everything, anything and everything, and then talking about them. What does this mean? Reading blogs, reading podcasts, reading news articles. What does this mean? How does this relate? How does it relate to what we were just talking about in history today? I wanted to give you a little bit of our family structure with our homeschooling. As many families as homeschool, that's as many different ways as you'll see homeschooling done. And that is one of the wonderful beauties of homeschooling, is that each family can decide what works for them, what's right for them. And I know for us, every year it's a little bit different because our children need different things. And so we tailor it to what they need. So just a basic structure in our home, we'll have morning devotional, and sometimes my older children won't participate in that because that's more of the younger children's morning devotional, because they sometimes have other activities early in the morning. And then I have learning time with my younger children, usually for about 3 hours in the morning. And a lot of times that learning time is learning how to work. It might be learning how to clean their room, learning how to clean a bathroom, maybe learning how to make their bed. but then a lot of choice in what they're learning and a lot of rich environment in which to do that, and a lot of different opportunities and interchange, and inevitably the older ones pop in and want to play with the baby, or come in and see we're playing with Play-Doh while we're listening to Little House on the Prairie, and they sit in for a few minutes, because who doesn't want to hear about Ma and Pa and how they saved the cow and made butter? Those kinds of stories are the stories that hold our families together. Then, typically in the afternoon, is time for them to just work on their free projects, and time for also Mom to work on my projects, because that's another part of our family environment, is that we want our children to live their mission. And as part of that, we believe strongly that we need to be setting the example in living our mission as parents as well. And one of our missions is to be parents and to educate them. But also we have other missions. One of our missions is that we feel strongly about homeschooling, and so we're spreading that message. I think I talked about freedom. Oh, there's the third part of our homeschooling. So we have God, family, and our third focus is community. We have in our community gathered together other families that are like-minded, and we have a weekly school. And it's a weekly school of we have about 35 families now, and actually it's been in existence in St. George for about 8 years, and it's broken off into 2 other schools now. It's multiplying because there's so many people wanting to do this now. But this community has been a great strength for our family and our children individually. So we do a weekly school. Moms and young children come, and we have different classes, and they learn together. It's also a time where moms have a mom's class where we take turns watching each other's kids, but we have a chance to increase our scholarship and to learn more about homeschooling, but also just learn more about truth and about things that really matter. Have a time to discuss and think and talk. And once again, be an example to our children that learning is really important to us. So the moms and children have their classes, but at the same time, the youth have their classes. So the 12 to 18-year-olds have classes once a week also, and it's an opportunity for them to have different mentors, different teachers who can teach them, someone else to turn their papers into, someone else to teach them in maybe a little bit of a different way as they get a little bit older. But yet we're all like-minded, and we have similar worldview, and we're able to strengthen and uplift each other. I know with my children who have gone through high school, having this community has been vital, especially for me, to be able to continue focusing on my younger ones, and to help them transition to taking that full ownership of their education. And as they get older, their final year or 2 years before they leave home, we have another project that we do with them. We design their full year of education and choose their mentors, and we have a support system for that too. This is just a picture here of our Shakespeare play that we put on this year. My son who's watching the baby up there, he's kind of in the middle with that red hat. He was Bottom in Midsummer Night's Dream. He got to be the donkey. Those are some of the kinds of things that as you gather a community together, it would be difficult for me to put on a Shakespeare play with my children at home. That's just not quite as many people, and Shakespeare's not quite my forte, and so it's been a great blessing to have other people who are my good friends and who I entrust with the teaching of my children to delegate some of that to them, and vice versa. We teach their children different things as well. And the kind of a side benefit of having this community of homeschool families is that we've established an actual organization where we have a board of administration and we have bylaws written. We're in the process of rewriting our bylaws because we've kind of changed our structure. But in this process, we're learning to govern ourselves in a voluntary situation, and it's been a valuable experience and another example of kind of a self-reliance in that we know as community members how we can rely on each other, but also what it means to be on a board and what it means to, how exactly would we want to vote on things. I think really important skills that would translate to a governance of a community, a larger community of families. All right, I'm going to turn some time over to Kent.
All right, so I'm going back to Patriots and Posers, this theme. I want to tell you a story of two boys. Interestingly enough, they were both born in the same year, in the same month. They were both born to very great families, well-to-do families, weren't really wanting for anything, so had all the opportunity in the world. George grew up being educated on the farm, a lot of influence from his mother, from his older brother, and from other mentors in the area. Charles was sent away to school very early on to boarding school, and later on he was sent to Switzerland to continue his education. At the young age of 14, both of them had opportunities career-wise. Charles actually became a commissioned officer. That was purchased for him by his father and became an officer in the British Army. George was offered a favorable appointment in the British Navy through a connection with his brother, but because he was a bit of a mama's boy, he decided to stay home to please his mother and didn't take that appointment. Later on, though, it was interesting to note that at the age of 23, they were both with General Braddock on an expedition. George was an aide-de-camp to General Braddock, and Charles was now lieutenant. And there was a skirmish this is part of the French and Indian War, and there was a skirmish there. Most of General Braddock's men were killed, most of the officers were killed, they were easy targets. George was very valiant in that fight, came away from that battle with a bit of fame because of his bulletproofness, if you will. Charles came away with a different spoil of war, being married to the daughter of a chief in the Mohawk tribe. So both of these young men, again, come from similar backgrounds, seem to be on a similar path as they're growing up, and then are poised on the precipice of perpetual prestige. Let's jump ahead 20 years. Now we're in the Revolutionary War. Charles became a general in the Revolutionary War. George also was a general in the Revolutionary War. Charles, interestingly enough, became very popular, became a great hero with the people in America and the colonies because of an engagement down in South Carolina. Shortly after that, though, he left his troops, went to a bed and breakfast seeking female companionship, not with his wife, and ended up being captured by the British. When he was captured, he ended up talking to the British admiral, on how they could capture General Washington. He was a bit of a traitor, if you will. General Washington didn't know that and actually exchanged prisoners of war to get him back because he was one of his lead generals. George, early on in his career as a general, had multiple defeat after defeat, and it felt like they were always running away with their tails between their legs. And what was happening is the British Army had decided that they needed to congregate all of their troops into a single spearhead to get this thing done with, to quit messing around. So they were gathering all their forces together, and that meant that they had a supply train that was 10, 20 miles long, just drawn out, going back into New York. And General Washington, with his Council of War, General Washington felt very strongly that that this was an opportunity for them to attack and, by the same token, put an end to the war. And so they put together their plans, and General Washington gave the assignment to Charles Lee, as one of his lead generals, to go lead a special part, and then he immediately called for retreat, which was not the plan. And so that messed up their whole plan with the Battle of Monmouth. They come running back. They run into General Washington. Washington asks what's happening. he tells them that they couldn't do it, they're running away, and he's left holding the pieces and trying to put that all back together. Well, the end of the story here is that Charles Lee, shortly thereafter, was court-martialed. Shortly after the Revolutionary War, he died in disgrace. But George Washington was a true patriot, always had been and always would be, because of the way that he was raised, because of the choices that he made. And you know what he went on to do. He was a great man, a great leader for our country. He was not perfect, but he did what was needed. Here are pictures of these two men. So which path do you choose? There are lots of different ways that we can choose to be a patriot as opposed to a poser, right? We can do that in politics, we can do that in church, we can do that in education. This is a funny comic, I like this. It rings true to the two generations, that of our founding fathers and where a lot of us find ourselves today. But the choice is yours. Regardless of what you look like, regardless of what you've been blessed with, regardless of what resources you find around yourselves, you can choose to be a patriot or a poser. It's your choice.
We just wanted to close by asking you the question that when you look into the eyes of your children, your grandchildren, maybe your nieces and your nephews, you're looking into the eyes of our future leaders, and to ask yourselves, will they be patriots or will they be posers?
Thank you.